My grandmother pulled my son aside at his own birthday party and whispered something into his ear that no child should ever hear. He was 8 years old, standing next to a table covered in blue frosting and dinosaur decorations. And when he came to me, his face was doing that thing children's faces do when the crying hasn't started yet but the damage already has. He told me what she said word for word, the way kids do when they're too shocked to filter anything. That she said he was the reason his parents divorced, that his mother hadn't wanted him. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that because people always ask. I felt something cold and very steady move through my chest, the way a thermostat clicks off, and I looked across the backyard at my grandmother, Dolores Tran, 71 years old, standing next to the potato salad with a paper plate and the expression of a woman who believes she has done something necessary, and I made a decision. I walked over to her slowly, the way you cross a room when you want to remember every step. I smiled. I took her free hand in both of mine, the way she'd always liked, and I said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "Before you leave today, you should know what I found in the attic yesterday." The police arrived 40 minutes later. But let me tell you how we got here, because that sentence, the attic, the police, all of it, means nothing without the 26 years that came before it. I am Nora Scott. My son is Caleb, and he was born on a Tuesday in October, 8 years ago, in a hospital room where I was alone because his father, my then husband Drew Tran, was at his mother's house being consoled about the pregnancy he had not wanted. That is not bitterness. That is a document I have, but I will get to documents. Dolores Tran is Drew's mother, which made her my mother in law for 6 years, and, in her own understanding of the world, my supervisor for the entirety of those 6 years and several beyond. Drew and I divorced when Caleb was 3. The stated reason was irreconcilable differences. The real reason was that Dolores had spent 6 years treating our marriage like a rental property she owned, and I was subletting under terms she could revise at any time. My own mother, Linda Scott, is a gentle woman who genuinely believed that if you were kind enough and patient enough and quiet enough, difficult people would eventually soften. She raised me on that belief. It took me until my early 30s to understand that some people interpret kindness as an inventory of what they can take. Drew's family had money in the way that families have money when it has been there long enough that no one talks about it directly, but everything they own references it. Dolores drove a black Range Rover she replaced every 3 years. Drew's father, Gerald Tran, had made his money in commercial real estate in the 90s and then spent the next 2 decades making sure everyone in their social circle understood that he had. Gerald died 4 years before Caleb was born, leaving Dolores the house, 3 investment properties, and a personality that had spent decades organizing itself around the project of maintaining status. I came from a family where status was not a project. My father worked in insurance. My mother taught fourth grade for 31 years. We had a house in a neighborhood that Dolores, the first time she visited, described as cozy in the tone of voice someone uses when they mean something else entirely. I was working as a commercial real estate analyst when I met Drew. I was 26. I was good at my job in the specific way that people are good at things when they have no backup plan. I had paid for most of my own graduate degree, and I understood property valuation the way some people understand music, intuitively, without having to count. Dolores never asked what I did for a living. In 6 years of marriage, she asked me 3 times about my work, and each time she asked in the middle of a sentence about something Drew needed. The first time I understood what I was dealing with came 8 months after the wedding. We were at a Sunday dinner at Dolores's house, a house I will describe only as large enough that you could have arguments in separate wings and not hear each other, which was the architecture's most useful feature, and Dolores was talking about Drew's cousin finding a new job. Corporate relocation consulting, she said, setting a serving dish down with the authority of a woman reading a verdict. It's a very stable field. Nora, have you ever considered something more stable? I was 31 years old. I had just closed the analysis on a mixed-use development that would go on to sell for $420,000 above its projected value, in part because of the report I had written. I said, "I'll keep that in mind," and passed the green beans to Drew's aunt. That night I drove home and I called my friend Keisha Drummond, who has known me since we were 19 and who has a gift for putting things plainly. I told her what Dolores had said. "So she thinks you're struggling," Keisha said. "She's never asked enough to know either way." "Then let her keep thinking it," Keisha said. "People who underestimate you are handing you something." I did not understand that as clearly then as I do now, but I filed it. The second incident happened the following Christmas. Drew's sister, Annalise Tran, who was 28 and worked in marketing and drove a car she couldn't afford to be seen not driving, pulled me aside near the appetizer table with the energy of someone delivering difficult news gently. Mom is a little worried, she said, about the pressure you're putting on Drew to keep up. I held my glass of sparkling water and looked at her. I'm not sure what you mean. The neighborhood, she lowered her voice. The house hunt. She feels like you're pushing him towards something that's going to stretch him too thin. What Annalise did not know, because I had not told Drew yet and Drew had not told his family, was that the down payment on the house we were looking at was coming almost entirely from a bonus I had received 6 weeks earlier for work on a portfolio valuation that had saved a client relationship worth millions to my firm. The bonus was $63,000. Drew's contribution was going to be the furniture. I smiled at Annalise. I appreciate her concern. I went back to the appetizers. 2 days later, I signed the purchase agreement. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, someone who looked at you and made a calculation and got it wrong, and then handed you information about what they didn't see, then you know exactly what that silence felt like. It was not passive, it was strategic. The third incident was the one that told me I needed to start being more careful. This was the year before the divorce, which means Caleb was about 2, and I was navigating a professional transition that I was not ready to discuss with anyone outside my closest circle. I had been approached about joining a smaller firm as a partner, which would mean a change in income structure, lower guaranteed salary, higher upside, more ownership. It was a risk I had been calculating for months. Dolores came to our house for Caleb's second birthday. It was a small party, just family. Drew was in the kitchen when Dolores sat across from me in the living room and said, without preamble, Drew tells me you're thinking of leaving your job. I kept my face neutral. Drew and I had talked about it once briefly, and I had been clear that nothing was decided. We've discussed some possibilities, I said. I think that would be very unwise. She said it the way you state a weather fact. With a baby, you have stability now. You don't throw that away. She glanced around our living room, the room in a house whose mortgage I was carrying at 60%, and said, this is not the time for experiments. I looked at her for a moment, then I said I was going to check on the cake and I excused myself. Standing in my kitchen, I made a decision. Not about the job offer, that decision was already made, I just hadn't announced it, but about something larger. About how much information I was going to let flow in Dolores's direction for the foreseeable future. The answer I arrived at, standing there with my hands on the counter while Caleb's birthday candles waited on the table, was none, not one detail that she hadn't already extracted. I joined the new firm 11 weeks later. Drew knew. Dolores did not for 4 months, and by the time she found out, the structure of what I had built there was already in place in ways she couldn't reverse. And that was just the beginning of what I was quietly assembling. The divorce happened the following spring. I won't give you the full architecture of it because that is Caleb's story to carry, not mine to narrate in detail. What I will tell you is that it was civil in the legal sense and brutal in every other sense, and that Dolores was present at every available opportunity in ways that a divorce attorney will tell you are completely legal and that a human being will tell you are completely intentional. My attorney was a woman named Renata Osai. She had been practicing family law for 19 years, and she had the quality that the best attorneys share, which is that she never seemed surprised by anything. I found her through Keisha, who had used her 2 years earlier, and the first time I sat across from her in her office on the fourth floor of a building downtown, she looked at the documents I had brought and said, "You've been keeping records." "Since the beginning," I said. She looked up at me. Good. What Dolores did not know, and what Drew only partially understood, was that I had been keeping contemporaneous notes about certain financial decisions made during the marriage. Decisions that had been presented to me as joint, but that had, on examination, a particular pattern. I had also, in the 18 months before the divorce was filed, quietly restructured my own financial position with the help of a financial advisor named Clifton Marsh, who worked out of a small independent firm, and who had been helping me build something that sat entirely in my name and entirely out of the shared marital accounts. Clifton was the one who suggested the 529 account for Caleb. We opened it when Caleb was 18 months old, and I funded it consistently through the divorce and after. And by the time of Caleb's 8th birthday, the balance had grown to $83,000, managed conservatively and growing quietly. Nobody in the Tran family knew it existed. There was no reason for them to know. It was mine, Caleb's, ours, and it was completely beyond the reach of anyone who might have opinions about how it should be used. After the divorce was finalized, I remained cordial with Dolores for one specific reason. Caleb loved her. Children have a remarkable capacity to love people who do not deserve it, And Caleb, who is a generous hearted kid who collects interesting rocks and has opinions about cloud formations, had a grandfather's worth of affection stored up with nowhere to put it after Gerald died, and some of it had found its way to Dolores. She was not unkind to him. I want to be accurate about this. Whatever she said about me, to Drew, to analyze, to anyone who would listen, she was not unkind to Caleb's face. So I maintained a surface. Holiday visits, occasional birthday acknowledgments. The minimum required to not be the reason my son lost his grandmother, because that was not a weight I was willing to put on him. What I discovered in the attic, 11 days before Caleb's 8th birthday party, was not what I had expected to find when I went up there to look for the box of birthday decorations from the previous year. The attic of the house I bought, the house whose mortgage I had carried, whose down payment I had mostly funded, which was awarded to me in the divorce settlement with a structured payment arrangement from Drew that he had been maintaining correctly, the attic was where I stored things I didn't need regularly. Old files, Caleb's outgrown clothes in labeled bins, holiday decorations. What I found, pushed to the back behind a set of plastic storage tubs, was a box I did not recognize. Inside the box were documents, specifically, documents relating to Gerald Tran's estate, which had been settled before I ever joined the family, and which I had no legal standing in and had never examined. I would not have recognized them as significant, except that 3 years of working adjacent to estate attorneys had given me enough literacy to understand what I was looking at. What I was looking at was a copy of Gerald's original will, pre amendment, and a copy of the amended version that had been filed at probate, and a set of handwritten notes that I recognized as Dolores's handwriting. Her particular way of forming the letters S and G was distinctive. I had seen it on birthday cards for 6 years, and the notes made clear that certain changes between the original will and the filed version had been discussed, planned, and in at least one case. Directed by Dolores in a manner that the original document had not authorized, I sat on the attic floor for a long time. I did not fully understand the legal implications of what I was holding. I am a commercial real estate analyst, not an estate attorney. But I understood enough to know that I needed to call someone who was, and I understood that the box being in my attic, how it had gotten there was something I was still working out, and the most likely explanation was both simple and deeply uncomfortable, meant that someone had put it there, and the person with the most access to that attic before and during my marriage was a woman who had visited this house dozens of times and who had, I now recalled, offered twice during the marriage to help organize the storage spaces. I photographed every page. I put the box back exactly as I had found it. I climbed down from the attic and I called Renata Osai. I need you to refer me to someone who handles estate disputes, I said when she answered, and I need to know if receiving documents that may relate to potential fraud creates any obligation for me immediately. There was a pause. Tell me what you found, I told her. Another pause longer. Don't touch anything else in that box. Don't tell anyone you found it. I'm going to call someone and have them contact you by end of business tomorrow. By the following afternoon, I was sitting across from an estate attorney named Howard Quame, who had the unhurried quality of someone who has seen worse and knows that haste is the enemy of accuracy. He went through my photographs carefully. He asked me several questions about the timeline of when I had lived in the house, when Dolores had access, and what my relationship to Gerald's estate had been, which was none at all. If what these notes indicate is accurate, Howard said, setting the last photograph down, someone altered the distribution instructions on a filed will. That's not a civil matter, that's potentially criminal. What do I do with that information? He looked at me steadily. You don't do anything right now. You document, you preserve, and you let me make some inquiries. This needs to go to the right authorities in the right order, or the chain of evidence gets compromised. I nodded. In the meantime, he said, act normally. Don't alert anyone. Is there any event coming up where you'll have contact with the family? I thought of the blue frosting and the dinosaur decorations and the venue deposit I had already paid. My son's birthday party, I said. 8 days, Howard nodded slowly. Keep it. Act normally. Document any interactions. I drove home and I sat in my car in the driveway for several minutes. Through the windshield, I could see the front of the house I had bought, kept, and was now solely responsible for in every sense. The house whose attic contained, as of that moment, a box of evidence that someone had placed there, possibly believing it would stay hidden indefinitely, possibly believing that I was not the kind of person who would know what she was looking at if she found it. I thought about what Dolores had said to me over the years. Stable field, more sustainable. This is not the time for experiments. I thought about a woman who had spent decades managing what people knew and what they didn't, who had looked at me and seen someone she could afford to dismiss. I went inside and I made Caleb's lunch, because it was 3:45 in the afternoon, and he would be home from school in 20 minutes. And the person he was going to see when he walked through the door was going to be his mother, calm and present and making lunch, and not a woman in the middle of the most carefully controlled moment of her adult life. Everything I had built, the documentation, the financial structure, the professional standing, the quiet years of acting normal while knowing more than anyone around me imagined, was about to be tested in front of every member of the Tran family who had accepted a birthday party invitation. The timing couldn't have been worse. Or maybe I thought, watching the street for the school bus, it was exactly perfect. The morning of Caleb's birthday party was a Saturday in October, the kind of day that looks warm through the window and isn't. I had been up since 5:45, not from anxiety, but from the specific alertness that had been my default state since the attic. Howard Quame had called me 2 days earlier to tell me that his preliminary inquiries had confirmed enough to proceed, and that I should expect contact from the county probate office within the following week. He had also said, in the careful way he said everything, that the documents I had found appeared to represent a pattern, not an incident, and that the implications for the estate settlement that had followed Gerald Tran's death 11 years ago were significant. I had thanked him, hung up, and gone back to inflating dinosaur balloons. Caleb had asked for a dinosaur party because he was going through a phase where he could tell you the dietary habits of a brachiosaurus without being prompted. He was bright and specific the way some children are, the kind of kid who notices things and files them for later, and I recognized that quality in him the way you recognize a thing you know from the inside. The guest list was small. Caleb's 4 closest friends from school, my mother Linda, my friend Keisha and her daughter. And Dolores, because Caleb had asked for her specifically, because she was the closest thing he had to a paternal grandmother who was present, and because I had not yet had reason to refuse her. Drew was not there. His relationship with Caleb had become what it had become, which is a separate story I will not tell here, except to say that Caleb had adjusted to it with a matter of factness that broke my heart a little and also made me fiercely proud of him. Annalise was there. I had not invited her, but she had texted 2 days before asking if she could come, and I had said yes because she was Caleb's aunt and he liked her, and because I had been operating for 11 days under a discipline of radical normalcy. The party was in my backyard. I had rented a small inflatable obstacle course shaped vaguely like a volcano, which Caleb had identified immediately as scientifically inaccurate, but had accepted as a gesture of intent. The picnic tables had blue paper tablecloths. There was a dinosaur cake I had ordered from a bakery 3 blocks over, which was genuinely impressive, and had taken me 40 minutes to pick up because the woman at the counter kept asking me which dinosaur was the T-Rex, and I had to explain it was the one with the disproportionately small arms. Dolores arrived at 2:15 in the afternoon. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer over dark slacks, which was her version of dressing down, and she brought Caleb a gift in a bag that had tissue paper arranged in a way that suggested it had been done by a store employee. She kissed him on the top of the head. She said he was getting tall. He said he was the third tallest in his class. She said that was wonderful and looked around my backyard the way she always did, cataloging. Keisha was at the drinks table when Dolores arrived. Keisha has known me long enough that her awareness of Dolores is fluent. She doesn't react to her arrival. She simply adjusts, the way you adjust when the barometric pressure changes. She caught my eye across the yard, and I gave her a small nod that meant I've got it. The first hour was what a child's birthday party is. Loud in patches, the kids mostly interested in the obstacle course, the adults mostly interested in the food, and Caleb moving between both with the proprietary energy of someone hosting his first event. I watched him and felt the thing I always feel watching him, which is a kind of fierce gladness that has no name I know of in English. Annalise was on her second glass of wine by 3 o'clock. She was talking to my mother near the cake table, and from across the yard, I could see my mother's patient expression, which is the expression she wears when she is listening to someone longer than she needs to. Annalise had a tendency to perform her own emotional processing out loud in the direction of whatever available audience she could find, and my mother was too kind to redirect her. It was at 3:12 in the afternoon. I know the time because I checked my phone moments earlier for a message from Howard, that I looked across the yard and noticed Dolores was not where she had been. She had been near the picnic table with the gift pile. She was not there anymore. I scanned the yard. The kids were at the obstacle course. Keisha was refilling her drink. Annalise was still talking. My mother was still listening. Dolores was around the side of the house, near the gate, and she had Caleb with her. I could not hear what she was saying from where I stood. I could see the angle of her body, turned toward him, and his face, which was tilted up at her with the open attention of a child who has been pulled aside and told something important is being said. I started moving. I was 12 feet away when I saw his face change. It is the specific change that a child's face makes before crying when the reason for crying is confusing, not just painful. It is not the face of a child who has scraped a knee. It is the face of a child who has been told something that doesn't make sense and that hurts anyway. I covered the remaining distance in 4 steps. Dolores looked up when she heard me. She did not look guilty. That was the part that stays with me. She looked like someone who has taken a reasonable action and is prepared to explain it. Caleb turned to me and his chin was doing the thing, the pre-cry compression that I knew as well as my own name, and he said, "Mom." Grandma says, and then his voice broke, the way 8-year-old voices do, and what came out was, "She said I'm why you and Daddy aren't together. She said you didn't want me." The world did not stop. That's not what happened. What happened is that something in my chest made a decision that my brain was still processing, a deep animal decision, and every careful strategy I had built over 11 days and 6 years, and the whole length of my adult life organized itself into a single clear intention. I looked at my son. "Go find Keisha. Tell her I need her to take you to see the cake." He searched my face. 8-year-olds are better at reading adults than adults think. Whatever he saw steadied him a little. He went. Then I turned to Dolores. She met my eyes without flinching. There it was again, that quality of a woman who believes herself to be operating from a position of righteousness. She touched the collar of her blazer. "He deserved to understand the situation," she said. I looked at her for a moment, 2 seconds, three. Then I took her hand in both of mine, because I wanted anyone watching to see a woman holding her grandmother-in-law's hand with apparent warmth, and I said, very quietly, "Before you leave today, you should know what I found in the attic yesterday." Her hand went very still inside mine. "I think you should stay until the guests leave," I said. "We need to talk." She did not respond immediately. Her thumb moved against the back of my hand, once, in the automatic way of someone buying time, and then she said, with the control of a woman who has been managing rooms for 50 years, "Of course." I went to Caleb. I found him with Keisha, who had her hand on his shoulder and was talking to him in the low, steady voice she uses with children and people who are upset. She looked up at me and I gave her the smallest nod. She understood. I crouched down in front of Caleb. "Hey, what Grandma Dolores said, that is not true, not any part of it. You were the best thing that happened to me and you still are every single day, okay?" Looked at me with those eyes that are too serious for his age and said, "Okay, and then, can I go back on the obstacle course?" "Yes," I said, "absolutely yes." He went. I stood up and took out my phone and I called Howard Quame. He answered on the second ring. "It's Nora," I said. "The party is today. She's here. I'm going to speak with her after the guests leave. I need to know, is there anything about this conversation that affects your timeline?" Howard was quiet for a moment. "Not legally. But if she says anything substantive, document it. Write it down immediately after. And Nora, if she acknowledges the documents in any way that is significant." "I understand. Do you want me to arrange for someone to be present?" I looked across the yard at Dolores, who had repositioned herself near the drinks table and was holding a paper cup with the composure of a woman at a garden party. "Not yet," I said, "but I'm calling you the moment she leaves." I hung up. Then I called Renata Osei and left a message. And I went back to my son's birthday party, and I watched him race through an inflatable volcano structure, and I helped cut a cake shaped like a triceratops, and I sang happy birthday and I meant every word of it. And underneath all of that I was steady in the way that a load-bearing wall is steady. Not because nothing is happening, but because everything that needs to hold is holding. The guests left in stages. Keisha was last, and she looked at me with the direct honesty she has always used with me. "You need me to stay? I've got it," I said, "but stay by your phone." She held my gaze for a moment longer, then gathered her daughter and her bag and said goodbye to Caleb, who hugged her around the middle with the enthusiasm of a child who has had exactly the right amount of birthday. She walked to her car. She did not drive away immediately, and I noticed that, and I was grateful for it. Caleb was inside. I had set him up with a documentary about prehistoric ocean life that he had been requesting for 2 weeks, and he was on the couch in dry socks with a second piece of cake, which was a birthday exception, and he knew it. Dolores was on the back porch. I walked out and I closed the sliding door behind me and I sat across from her at the patio table, and I did not offer anything, no coffee, no soft opening, no social lubricant. The afternoon light had gone flat and cool. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog was barking with the mechanical persistence of a dog that has forgotten why it started. Dolores spoke first. "I said what I said because he is old enough to understand that choices have consequences. You told my 8-year-old son that his mother didn't want him at his birthday party. I told him the truth as I understand it. She had the quality then of a woman who has rehearsed this, who has decided in advance what the truth is and how to deliver it. You pursued the divorce, you pushed Drew out. That child has grown up without a father because of decisions you made. I looked at her. I need to tell you something. She touched her collar. There it was. 11 days ago, I went into my attic to find birthday decorations. I found something else, a box that doesn't belong to me. A pause, 1 second, two. I don't know what you're referring to, she said. I think you do. I kept my voice at conversation level. It contained documents related to Gerald's estate, including a copy of his original will and a copy of the amended version that went to probate, and handwritten notes. She put her paper cup down on the table. She put it down carefully, with a precision that was not carefulness but control. Those are private family documents, she said. They are. They're also documents that appear to show a significant discrepancy between Gerald's original instructions and what was filed, and notes in your handwriting discussing how to manage that discrepancy. For the first time in 6 years of knowing her, Dolores Tran did not have an immediate response. She sat across from me and I watched something calculate behind her eyes, and then she said, "You don't know what you're talking about. I've had an estate attorney review the photographs I took. He disagrees with you." She stood up. "This conversation is over. You're welcome to leave," I said. "But I've already spoken with Howard Quaim, and I've already spoken with Renata Osai, and I have a message in to the county probate office. So the conversation is happening whether or not you're in it." She stood at the edge of the porch for a moment with her hand on the back of the chair. Then she sat back down, not gracefully. The sitting was the first graceless thing I had ever seen her do. "What do you want?" Her voice was different. It had lost the social register it always operated in, the one that communicated effortless authority. What was underneath it was smaller and harder. "I don't want anything from you," I said. "That ship sailed the moment you pulled my son aside at his own birthday party. What happens now is not about what I want. It's about what the probate office and the county DA's office determine about those documents." She looked at me across the table and she said, very quietly, "You have no idea what Gerald was really like." I stopped. It was the first thing she had said that did not feel like a defense. It felt like something else, something she had been carrying for 11 years that had found an exit. "He changed that will 3 times in the last 4 years of his life," she said. Her voice had dropped to something I had never heard from her before, something almost private. "Each time a different grandchild, each time a different percentage. He enjoyed it, the control of it, making people wait, making them compete." She looked at her hands. "I stopped the last version because it would have cut Drew out entirely and given the majority to Gerald's brother's family, people who hadn't spoken to him in 12 years. I stopped it because Drew is my son and he had done nothing wrong." I sat with that for a moment. "That's not for you to decide," I said finally. "And it's not for me to decide, that's why courts exist." She looked up at me. For the first time, there was something in her expression that I had to look at carefully to name, and what I finally named it as was fear. Not of me, of what she had done and what it had cost and what it was going to cost. "What happens now," she said, "happens regardless of anything I say to you today. Is that right?" "Yes," I said. "Howard has already initiated contact." She nodded once, the nod of someone accepting a verdict they had expected. Then I said, "But I want you to understand something, separate from all of that. What you said to my son today, I am not going to let that go unanswered. Not for the estate, not for the legal process, but for him. He is 8 years old and he needed to hear from you that he is loved, and instead you handed him a lie designed to hurt me and it landed on him. That is not fixable by an attorney or a probate court. That is something you have to live with." She did not look away. Her hand had gone to her necklace, a pearl strand she wore at every family gathering, and she held it there, not fidgeting, just holding. "I know," she said. It came out very simply, without the architecture of self-justification that had surrounded everything else she'd said. Just 2 words, and I believed them, which made the whole thing worse and better at the same time. We sat there for another moment, then I stood. "You should go," I said. "I'll be in contact through Renata when there's something formal to respond to." She stood. She straightened her blazer. The composure came back incrementally, like a tide returning, but it was not the same composure. It fit differently now. She walked through the side gate without going back inside, which told me she understood there was nothing left to retrieve. I watched the gate close behind her. I stood on the porch for 30 seconds. Then I went inside and I called Howard Quaim. He picked up on the first ring. "She acknowledged the documents," I said. "She provided context around her reasoning. She didn't deny the alterations." A pause. "Did you record the conversation?" "I'm in a one-party consent state." "Yes." Another pause and I could hear him exhaling. "Nora, send me the recording tonight. Already on my phone." "Okay." He was quiet for a moment. This changes the timeline considerably. I'm going to need to loop in someone at the DA's office. The combination of what's in those photographs and what she acknowledged this afternoon, this is not something the probate court handles alone. I looked through the sliding glass door at Caleb, who was on the couch with his socks on and his eyes on his documentary, the orange evening light making a frame of the window around him. Do what you need to do, I said. The police arrived 40 minutes later. Not because I called them. Howard had made a call to his contact in the county DA's office, who had made a call to a detective named Reginald Farr, who had apparently been familiar with Gerald Tran's estate through a separate inquiry that I was not yet aware of. They arrived in an unmarked car, two of them, and they knocked on Dolores's door 2 blocks from my house. I know this because Annalise called me at 7:15 that evening, her voice at a pitch I had never heard from her before. Nora. She said my name like a question. There are detectives at my mother's house. I know. A silence that went several seconds longer than any silence Annalise had ever allowed in a conversation. You know, I've been in contact with an estate attorney for 11 days, I said. Annalise, I need you to listen to me. This is not something I did to your mother. This is something your mother did 11 years ago that has been waiting to surface. What happens now is between her and the legal system. She's 71 years old. Her voice broke on the word old. She is 71 years old and she is standing in her living room talking to 2 detectives. I know, and I did know. And it was not a satisfying thing to know, not in the way I might have expected. It was a hard and necessary thing. Analyze, get her an attorney tonight. That is the most useful thing you can do for her right now. A pause, then. Did she really say that to Caleb? The shift in the sentence was so abrupt I had to recalibrate. Yes, another silence. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know she was going to do that. And then more quietly, I should have watched her more carefully. You couldn't have known. I meant it. We stayed on the phone for another minute without saying much, and then she said she needed to go, and I said yes, go, and she hung up, and I sat at my kitchen table in the quiet of a house where the birthday party had just happened, and where my son was watching ancient ocean creatures move across a screen in the next room. If you're still with me, stay, because the next part is the reason I am telling you this story. Detective Farr called me the following morning at 9:40. He was methodical in the way of someone who has been doing precise work for a long time. He asked me a series of questions about how I had found the box, what I had done with it, what Dolores had said on the porch. He asked if I was willing to provide a formal statement. I said yes. He asked about the recording. I said my attorney would coordinate the transfer. Ms. Scott, he said, I want to be transparent with you about something. The documents you found are relevant to an inquiry that has been open in our office for approximately 14 months. Your discovery and the statement made by Ms. Tran this afternoon may be the connection we have been looking for. I sat with that for a moment. 14 months. Dolores had been under inquiry for over a year and had walked into my son's birthday party and told him his mother hadn't wanted him. What happens next? I asked. Ms. Tran has retained an attorney. The DA's office will determine charges within the next few weeks. The probate court will need to be involved as well, given the nature of the alterations. Can I ask, what kind of charges are we looking at? Well, fraud, he said. Potentially forgery, depending on the findings of the document analysis. Both are felonies in this state. The formal charges came 6 weeks later. Well, fraud and a single count of forgery, relating to a signature on an amendment document that analysis determined had been added after the original was drafted. Gerald's estate, which had been considered settled for 11 years, was reopened. The distribution under the fraudulent amendment, which had routed a significantly larger share to Dolores's personal accounts, away from a trust that should have included Drew and the extended Tran family, was flagged for recovery proceedings. Drew's cousin Leon, who had received far less from the estate than Gerald's original will would have given him, hired his own attorney within the week. I was not a party to any of that litigation. I had no standing in Gerald's estate and no claim to it. What I had was a box of documents that I had found in my attic and turned over to the appropriate people. Howard Quame submitted his invoices, and I paid them, and I did not consider it a cost. I considered it the final line item of a marriage that I had been closing out for 3 years. The confrontation I had expected, the kind with raised voices and an audience, never quite happened. What happened instead was quieter, and in retrospect, more complete. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in a conference room at Renata Osai's office, where I sat across a table from Dolores's attorney, a man named Gregory Sato, silver-haired and precise, while Renata sat beside me, and where the question under discussion was not the estate but the birthday party. I had asked Renata whether Dolores's conduct toward Caleb constituted anything actionable. Not in a criminal sense, Renata had said, during our prep call the night before. But in the context of custody and grandparent access, What she said, how she said it, and the documented impact on your son, that matters. It changes the terms on which she can claim any relationship with him going forward. What happened in that conference room was that Gregory Sato looked at the documentation Renata had prepared, including a brief note from Caleb's pediatric therapist, Dr. Yvonne Baptiste, who had seen Caleb twice since the birthday party, and had written two careful paragraphs about the question Caleb had asked her on his second visit, which was whether it was possible to be the reason something bad happened without knowing you were doing it. And Gregory Sato set the documentation down and looked at his hands. Then he looked at Dolores, who was sitting to his left with her pearl necklace and her cream blazer, and something passed between them that I wasn't meant to see. A recognition of a line that had been crossed in a way that legal strategy could not entirely manage. The agreement we reached that afternoon was not a custody order because I had sole custody and had always had sole custody, and Drew's visitation schedule did not involve his mother. What it was, legally, was a documented acknowledgement that Dolores's access to Caleb would be determined solely by my consent going forward, that she had no independent claim to contact with him, and that any future contact she initiated without my prior agreement would be treated as a formal violation. She signed it, Gregory Sato signed it, Renata notarized it. Dolores looked at me once during the signing, and I looked back, and I did not feel what I had expected to feel, which was satisfaction. I felt something more like the specific exhaustion of a project that has finally reached completion, the kind of tired that is not unhappy. The criminal proceedings took longer. Dolores ultimately accepted a plea arrangement. Will fraud charges reduced in exchange for full cooperation with the probate recovery process and restitution to the estate. She did not serve jail time, a decision that Leon challenged and ultimately accepted because the recovery of the misrouted funds was the priority. The restitution amount, which the probate court determined after a full audit of the 11-year-old distribution, was $214,000. She sold the Range Rover. Annalise called me 3 months after the conference room. She called on a Sunday evening, and she said she was calling because she owed me a conversation, not an apology. She was careful about that distinction, which told me she had thought about it, but a conversation. I knew she managed people, Annalise said. I didn't know the scope of it. I thought it was just family, just the way she operated with family. I didn't know it had gone that far. I believe you, I said. How is Caleb? He's good, I said, and I meant it in the specific way you mean it when a child has processed something difficult and come out the other side still himself. He's really good. He's decided that the most interesting dinosaur is actually not T-Rex, it's Pachycephalosaurus, and he has a lot to say about it. She laughed. It was a small laugh surprised out of her, and it was the most genuine thing I had heard from her in 6 years. We are not close. We are not going to be close. But we are something, two adults who share a child in their life who is not a source of conflict between us anymore, and that is more than I had 2 years ago. Drew reached out once, through his own attorney, with a question about whether I would be willing to provide a statement in support of his position in the estate recovery proceedings, given that he had also received less than Gerald's original will had indicated. I discussed it with Howard. I provided the statement. I had no reason not to. Drew had been many things during our marriage that I would not say about him in a public forum, but he had not known about his mother's alterations, and the estate question was between him and the court, not between him and me. The probate court's final determination came on a March morning, 14 months after I climbed down from my attic with a phone full of photographs. I got a call from Howard at 8:15 telling me it was done. I was at my desk at work. I am a managing partner now at the firm. I joined 12 years ago as an analyst. And I thanked him and hung up and looked out my office window at the skyline for about 30 seconds. Then I went back to the valuation report I had been working on. Caleb is thriving. He has new rocks and a strong opinion about Pachycephalosaurus, and a therapist he calls the Question Lady, because Dr. Baptiste structures their sessions as a series of questions he gets to answer or not answer, and he finds this arrangement philosophically satisfying. He has not asked about Dolores since the birthday party. Not once. Children know what they need, and what he needed was to not have that particular door reopened, so I have not reopened it. The $83,000 in his college fund has had another 14 months to grow. It sits there quietly, doing what it was always designed to do, out of reach of anyone who isn't him. My grandmother used to say that some things have to come to a head before they can heal. I don't know if she was right in general. I know she was right about this specific situation, and I know that what I found in that attic was not luck, it was consequence, the consequence of a woman who believed she had put something somewhere it would never be found, in the house of a person she had decided did not look hard enough or think carefully enough to be a threat. She was wrong about the house. She was wrong about the person. So, did I go too far or not far enough? Tell me in the comments.